Good morning and welcome to a midweek edition of the Sun's Solar Panel. I am here with Keith Smith, NBA. Keith has been a regular visitor on our show. God, I really appreciate you, Keith, because you're such a great cap guy. You really know your numbers. And we've got a very confusing situation here with Deandre Ayton. It does not seem like it should be confusing, but then every time somebody throws out a trade idea, we shoot it down saying that won't work. So my name is Dave King. For those joining us for the first time, this is the Sun Solar Panel. We cover all things Phoenix Suns year round. And we are about 3 weeks away from free agency. And this is where one of the Suns' biggest available free agents is coming up that may end up leaving the team for the first time in years. And I've got Keith Smith here to talk through all of that. But before we start into the rigmarole of Deandre Ayton, I want to let Keith Smith crow a little bit because Keith is also a huge fan of the Boston Celtics. And for the first time, the Boston Celtics, has it been with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they got to the Eastern Conference Finals 3 times before this year and came up short each of those times. But now they finally broke through and got to the finals. How does it feel to be a Celtics fan right now, Keith?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. This season was a little bit of a roller coaster. It started off not great. They were not playing well early in the year, and then they really right around when the calendar turned to 2022, they picked things up and really moved forward from there. So it's been huge for them to finally break through and get to the finals. They were up 1-0. They got their tails kicked a little bit in game 2, but we'll see. Now they got the split on the road. They took home court advantage away. They're headed to Boston for game 3. So we'll see where the series goes from here. But major accomplishment just to get there.
Absolutely. So the Celtics are in the finals. They're led by their two-headed stars of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but they have a ton of really good play and role players. What's really interesting, excuse me, is that the Celtics are a relatively young team. They've got Al Horford as their long tooth veteran leader, but really they're a relatively young team. And usually young teams play better at home than on the road. And yet throughout these playoffs, I believe the Celtics are better on the road than they are at home. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, well, in general, yes. Now, some of that, there was a short series in the first round. It was a sweep, so they only got 2 home games there. But yeah, they've been great on the road. They've also been really good coming back from losses. They're 6-0 coming off a loss in these playoffs, so that's been kind of the hallmark of this team has been their resiliency. In 2022, they have not lost back-to-back games except for one time, and in that one situation, they punted the second game. They sat a bunch of guys for rest reasons. So they were, really they've been kind of, no matter what happens, if it goes poorly, they bounce back very big with the next go around. So it's we'll see what happens here now with it switching back to Boston, but that crowd's going to be bonkers. This is the first finals game they've seen since 2012, or I'm sorry, 2010 rather. So it's been they're going to be ready to go. They're going to be fired up.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. That's going to be really fun. That next game is on Wednesday night, game 3 of the NBA Finals. And I believe that's on ABC. So check your local listings and make sure you watch that. Viewership is up. And this makes me sad, but the viewership is up like 30% this year because it's Boston, big market, Golden State, 6 of the last 8 times in the finals. Really fun team to watch historically. So TV viewership is way up over a year ago, even though it feels like everybody watched Suns Bucks a year ago. So good for you. Good for Boston. I really hope you kick Golden State's butt. I really want you to.
I appreciate that. I think that the TV numbers too, we have to factor in the fact that it's at its normal time. in early June versus being in July,
July
which was
when
a lot
NFL
of people
training
were
camps.
traveling. Yeah, and I can tell you, we were traveling during the finals last year. I actually
Right.
watched the last handful of games from the road as my family was on our first vacation in a couple years. So it definitely helps that we're back on the normal calendar.
That's a good point. Good buddy of ours, good friend of the show, Justin, who co-hosts another pod, Suns pod, fanning the Flames. He actually missed the last four games of the NBA Finals a year ago because of a pre-planned vacation, and nobody thought people would be still be playing in July when
Sure.
all this happened. They had bought those tickets long before.
Mhm.
Okay, moving on to this year, the and my team, the Phoenix Suns. We watched a weird, unexplainable, still unexplained meltdown from the Phoenix Suns after going up 2-0 on the Dallas Mavericks. They lost four of the last five games. As an outsider, Keith, across country, watching the Eastern Conference playoffs, you probably weren't paying any attention to the Phoenix Suns in the playoffs. Do you have an outsider's take on what the heck happened there?
No, I was watching all those games, and it was yeah, I feel like Dallas figured some stuff out defensively that made the Suns have to really work for their offense, putting more size on Chris Paul and saying, "Hey, we'll kind of live with mismatches that may create other spots." Like I think that was big. Clearly, they found a couple different ways to spring Luca. They went full on into their small lineups. Dwight Powell played the first couple minutes of each half, and then was out,
Mm-hmm.
never to be seen again from there. And then it was just they I think as the series went along, I felt like they looked like they were just outworking Phoenix on both ends of the floor, just really staying locked in defensively and getting after it. And that game seven was one of the more inexplicable games I've ever watched, where I've never seen a team come out like they just. It was. I don't want to say the Suns didn't want to be there because it's that would be
No, they
weird.
play.
I don't
I
know
agree.
that,
They played
but
like they didn't want to
yeah,
be there.
yeah, they just that was very odd to see that kind of game, and it looked like it looked almost like it was game 4 or 5 of a series when you were down, and it's
Yeah,
like all right, we don't have it tonight. Let's just move on versus being in game 7. That's one
yeah.
that'll stick with me for a while because I don't know that
It'll
we're ever
stick
going
with
to fully
everybody for
understand
a
what
while.
happened there.
Yeah, it's funny. Of course, because the season ended after that game, we haven't really talked to the coach or the players much. They don't really do exit interviews, team-wide exit interviews anymore in Phoenix. So all we really got was Monty Williams, Devin Booker, and post game Monty Williams, Devin Booker, Chris Paul, the usuals. And then the next day, only Monty Williams and nothing since. And Monty Williams is basically saying, "Look, man, we took all these accolades for 3 years. You got to take all the crap right now and just
Hmm.
accept it." But really, the players and the coach themselves had no answer for what the heck happened. Like you said, it felt like we've got tomorrow. We'll come back better tomorrow. It felt like they had just and it was over before it started. Mikal Bridges recently did an interview with JJ Redick where he said it got real scary because it just started snowballing and all of a sudden it was 30 points and there was no way to come back and we had no idea what happened.
Yeah.
And that was from his point of view. Obviously, everybody had their own takes. There's unsubstantiated rumors about possibly COVID, pre-diagnosed COVID. There's unsubstantiated rumors about injuries that we haven't heard any reports on surgeries or anything like that. But you know what? The Suns didn't make any excuses, but they also didn't make any apologies, and fans are really left to wonder what the heck's going on. One thing that did happen was Deandre Ayton snapped at his coach during the third quarter of that game, and while that is in a vacuum, in a void of information, that's being blown out of proportion and carried a lot. There's two things about DeAndre Ayton that are being blown out of proportion and carried longer than they should, but because of the vacuum of an off season, there's no new news information to get over it, right? It's a 24-hour news cycle suddenly becomes a 6-month news cycle, or at least a 2-month news cycle until free agency. Um, Deandre Ayton did an interview with a magazine and basically said he gets 2 hours of sleep at night because he can't stop playing video games after his kid goes to bed. And then another situation where he got into a tiff with his own coach during the third quarter of that game when they were already down 38 points. And his coach reportedly said something like, "You freaking quit on us." And Ayton, obviously shot back and said, "Well, I can't pass myself the ball," stuff like that. And now that's all being blown out of proportion. But it does leave a lot of us wondering what the heck is going to happen with DeAndre Ayton. The Suns did not re-sign him to an extension last year, give him an extension last year, because the only extension he was willing to entertain was the 5-year designated max. Now this summer, he's a restricted free agent. He could be, he could sign with any team. But there's a weird thing about his restricted free agency, in that if the Suns want to do a sign and trade, where look, if the Suns are fed up with him for reasons that have just built over time because he doesn't work consistently hard enough, if the Suns are ready to sign and trade him, there's a weird loophole thing called a base year compensation that's still in the collective bargaining agreement that makes it really difficult for the Suns to trade him for equal value. Can you give us a primer on that, and then we'll talk through some scenarios on how that hinders or helps the Suns? Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Oops. Sorry. You still there, Dave?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I don't know what happened with my computer here. It won't let me get back to you, but there we go. I found you. Sorry. Little technical challenges there for a second. All right. So if we look at what I was trying to do is set up so I could toggle screens. So base year compensation used to be, people may have kind of a base level familiarity with it because it used to be a much bigger thing that was involved all sorts of stuff and made making trades messy and things like that. Now where we're at with base year compensation is it only applies in one specific circumstance, and that's during a sign and trade. What happens with base year compensation is if you use bird rights, so that's either full bird or early bird rights, to re-sign a free agent and then trade them, and the player receives a raise that's greater than 20% of their prior year salary, and that player's team is at or above the cap when they do the re-signing, what that does is that triggers the base year compensation. And what happens in that situation is the player counts at either 50% of their new salary or their prior salary, whichever is greater. That's what they count at in the trade. Now, because there's a raise, they're always going to be 50% of their new salary, just the way it's going to work out on that. So just the easy way to think of this is if DeAndre Ayton gets something in the $30 million range in first year salary, he will only count on the Sun side as 15 million in salary matching in a trade going out. Now, where it gets tricky, that's normally like, okay, that's fine. We can work around that. He counts at the full salary on the incoming side for the other team. And basically, what this is set up to do is it's not to eliminate sign and trades, it's just making it a little bit harder for teams to not just immediately, re-sign a guy to this big, massive number strictly for the express purposes of trading him. You need to make it workable on both sides.
Okay, so let's assume DeAndre Ayton gets in a sign and trade. There's a team willing to pay him his full 25% of the cap, and so that's just over 30 million, 30.7 million. So counting for half of that is more than last year's salary for Ayton. So that would be 15 million. Tell me where the 18.8 comes in that I've heard that is a matching that actually is what counts for the Suns going out.
Yeah, so I'm not sure where that exact number comes from, because what happens for the Suns, they would be it all kind of depends on where they land. Are they going to be at the time that they re-sign and trade him? Are they a tax team? Or at the time that they re-sign and trade him, are they not a tax team? If they're a tax team, then what happens is it becomes 125% of the 50% salary. So right now, that first year max projects to be 30.5 million. So I did everything based off of that. So
Mhm.
you're talking Dayton counts at 15.25 million in trade. So what would happen there is then he would get that would be if they're a tax team, the 125% of that plus 100,000. So that's roughly call it 19.2 million. That's where
Okay.
that number would be. So there's
So
your
about
kind of
19 million.
yeah, right around that range. Now, if they're not a tax team, which there's ways they could get there to
Well,
via
but does
secrets
the tax
transaction.
team part include that signing?
It does, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's where you're at the time you sign and then trade the player. So
Yeah.
what
So that
happens
would put
is
them, that would definitely make them a tax team unless they got rid of some players first.
yep, and there's ways to do that, right? Because you could pay a team to take Dario Saric on first, sequence your
Sure.
moves so you're not a tax team. But if they're not a tax team, then what happens is because they're in that middle range of the trade rules and salary
Mhm.
matching, it would be the outgoing salary. So again, 15.25 million plus 5 million, which
Ah, that's
is
the
the
5 million.
that gets you to the 20.3 million or so in salary matching. So that's obviously more desirable if you can make it happen that way because it's about a
Depends on
million
the
more
guy you're
you
trying to
can do.
bring back. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's about a million more in salary matching or so, which that should never be the difference in a trade. You ought to be able to always figure out a way to make that balance off. But that's the that's just DeAndre Ayton. Now you add more salary to that trade or anything like that, that starts to change your math in different ways and those kind of things. But the important thing to remember is you still have that roughly $15 million imbalance
Difference. Mhm.
between Ayton, his value in a trade on the Sun side versus value in trade on the acquiring team side. That's why in these base year compensation deals, it generally is you're trading a player to a team with cap space or a team with a large enough trade exception. We can take the trade exception kind of out of the window for most teams because there's only a handful that have the ability to take that in at that number at 30 million. Nobody has a trade exception that big. So you're really talking about a cap space team. Or then you've got to get maybe a third team involved where you're rerouting some
Mhm.
salaries around. Because otherwise, in order to get to matching 30 million, you're gonna have to get you're gonna have to send back so much money to the Sun side that it can start to become unbalanced that way. So these base year compensation deals
Yeah.
are very difficult to pull off.
Okay, so let's use some scenarios to illustrate this a little bit. Let's take a real simple one. Clint
Sure.
Capella makes $17 million this year, this coming year. Okay, um, and that would fit into either of the 125% or the plus 5 million rule. Could you do
Clint
if the Suns
Capella's at
wanted to?
19.7
Oh,
for
he
this
is.
coming year.
Whoops, I
Yeah.
thought I just did it. Oh, that's for the wrong year. Gotcha. So let's that's okay. Then it's not
Sure.
quite as
Yeah.
simple,
See it through.
but let's
Yep.
talk through it. Okay. So 19 million. Thank you for that correction. That puts him over the 18, that puts him over the 19, whatever it is you're doing for the
Yeah. They're about
25%.
600,000 short.
600,000 short. So let's say the Suns are a tax team and they're 600,000 short on the salary, the ability to do that, to bring Clint Capella back. How would either team make up that difference? What's an example?
Yeah, that's where it gets hard because so if you're talking about Clint Capella by himself, because the Hawks would also be a tax team in this situation, he can only bring back about 24.6 million. So now your challenge is they got to bring in a $30 million player. So the easy thought would be, well, they add a $6 million player to the deal, whoever that may be. Um,
Who's they?
the Hawks would have to in that case because they can only match salary in a trade up to trading Capella by himself of up to 24.6 million. So again, you got to get to 30 for Aiton's
Right.
max.
So they
No,
have to, what you're saying is in this Hawks trade, hypothetical Hawks trade, the Hawks taking in Ayton at 30, they cannot send out less than 24,
correct.
right?
Well,
24 million.
they can't. They would have to send at 30. You got to get to you got to get to about what is that work out to about 25 million ish in that range 24 million. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and Capella himself only counts for 19.7.
Correct.
So then the Hawks have to send out 6 more million, but the Suns
Yep.
can't take that 6 million back,
Correct.
let alone even take. So how would you solve that? Would you spin that $6 million player off to another team into cap space?
That's that's what you got to do. You got to find a team with an exception or a team that has cap space or something that's willing to take on, another player. Now, hey, I'm just to make the math easy on
Yeah.
this one. I'm not at all saying this is the way it would go, but you would have in that case. Onyeka Okongwu makes just over $6 million for the Hawks, so you could add him to the deal. Now, here's where the other complicated factor comes in all these great ideas to
Mm-hmm.
sign and trade eight in the teams. If you're above the tax apron, you cannot acquire a player via the sign and trade.
Right.
So in that case, the Hawks would be well above the tax apron. So they would not be able to even do this trade. They would not be able to acquire Ayton because you can't acquire a player via sign and trade once you're already over the tax apron. And that math is done at the end of the trade. So what you do is basically you process the trade. Where would this all fall out? You'd be above the apron. You can't do it. So
Okay.
that's your other challenge in these trades. So I'll give you an example without calling out the place where I was listening to it. But there were very popular podcast was throwing out a million Deandre Ayton sign and trades, and I was literally driving my daughter to school, or it might have been driving home from school, whatever it was. I think it was by myself, and I was screaming in the car. That's illegal. You can't do that. You're just going to confuse people, because it's just like it's sign and trade Deandre Ayton of the Brooklyn Nets. Was thrown out there, or the Golden State Warriors, or one of these teams that's a million miles above the tax apron, and it just that's that any team that's already a tax team, just take them out of the mix
Okay.
because it's not happening.
Okay. So any team that's already a tax team, now the apron is only like, what is it, 10, 12 million over the tax level
6
or something
million.
like that? 6
Yeah,
million.
roughly 6
The apron's
million.
only 6. So basically any team that's a tax team cannot acquire a player that is signed and traded. So that takes that, and that in this example, so the sounds like simple trade to acquire Clint Capella for Deandre Ayton can't happen for several reasons. One, the Hawks can't even take him. Two, the Hawks would have to send out a $6 million player to even make their side of it work, and they're not going to want to do that just for cash, because they can't take anything back for that. It has to be a straight salary out. And three, Capella himself is over that little number that the Suns are allowed to take back. Now, if the Suns got themselves under luxury tax level after
then he fits.
post trade, then they could fit him. But that's only if they gave up like a Dario Saric for free. So not only are the Hawks giving up somebody for free, the Suns have to give up somebody for free, and that's just to get Capella in a trade that can't even happen in that particular case. So let's move on to another.
Yeah, well, one thing I do want to say with the Hawks too, the Hawks are sitting on Danilo Gallinari has a large chunk of non-guaranteed salary, so they could get themselves under the apron, but that still doesn't necessarily mean you're going to clear all the necessary room you need, because the other factor is you have to factor we still have to fill out our roster, and in this case we'd only have about 7 guys under contract, and we still have to fill out our roster, and then you run into the issues, quite frankly, that the Lakers were in last year, which was we have a million guys, signed here, but we had to fill them out with all minimum contracts because we were so far over, the tax apron. So that's where that gets a little bit tricky on those kind of things.
Okay, so that layout for the Capella trade obviously doesn't work, but let's switch it over really quick to a Jerami Grant. John Hollinger
Mhm.
wrote about Jerami Grant possibly being acquired by the Suns, and he made it sound like it's real simple for the Suns to get to Grant's $20 million number
Yep.
by including a couple of extra contracts. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So what would happen in that case is, um, they wouldn't even necessarily need to even go that route, with the Pistons, because what the Pistons could do is, one, they could just take Aiden in via cap space, solely, and then on their side, that's gets you there with the 30 million, just
Yeah,
slides into the
they
cap.
don't have any salary matching issues.
Correct. Now for the Suns, because Grant and we're remember too, the other important thing is none of this stuff can happen at the draft because Aiton's not, you can't sign and trade a guy
Right.
at the draft. This all has to be next year. So we can't look at this year's salaries. We all have to look at the 22-23 salaries. So
Mhm.
Jerami Grant's at 20.9 million. So if we go back just to remind everybody once again,
Yeah.
um, where that's over our number, right, for the Suns.
Mhm.
But because the Pistons could be sitting on 35 million or so in cap space, what the Suns could do is they could throw in Cameron Payne. I'm
Gotcha.
just using him as the easy one, Torrey Craig, whoever you
So
need to do.
okay.
And
So the
that's
only
your
reason
salary
that
match.
I'm sorry, but it finally hit me like the light turned on because I was like reading the Hollinger thing and I'm like, no. But then it's because Detroit has cap space and they can take in 8 and plus. And the Suns could just make up that $2 million difference with a plus because the Pistons are so far under. Now, how many teams are like the Pistons where they could take in an 8 and plus and send back a $20 million player?
Yeah, very, very few.
Yeah.
This year, the Pistons project to have the most cap space at about 36 million or so. Um, the other teams that project to have cap space, you've got the Indiana Pacers at about 25.6, Orlando likely to have right around 28 million in space. The Spurs could have about 19-20 million in space, could even get up a little bit higher than that if they wanted to. And then we'll see, where a team like Portland goes. If Portland decides to go the cap space route, they can get to a good chunk of cap space. Or we could see a team like Memphis. Also, if they were to let their own free agents walk, they could get to about 20 million in cap space or so. But that's really kind of it without getting really, absurd and crazy. They're the one team that I will say, because it comes up all the time, that I did not mention there is the Oklahoma City Thunder. And
Yeah.
people are always like, how are they, not there? They have contract extensions kicking in for guys like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander next year. Derek Favors picked up his player option to extend his deal another year. So they're going to actually very likely be operating as an over the cap team. They also have 3 first-round picks. Those all add up and start to get expensive towards the cap as well. So the Thunder are likely, very, very likely this year to be an over the cap team. They're sitting on a mountain of cap space right now, and that'll probably get used up somewhat at the draft, and they'll figure things out. But going into next season, they're likely to be over the cap.
Right, but that doesn't work for Aiton because Aiton
Correct.
cannot be traded until after
Correct. Yep.
free agency starts.
Exactly.
Okay, let's pivot
And
then.
if I
Oh,
can,
go
too,
ahead.
one last thing,
Yeah,
because I hear this a lot with eight and stuff, is it is extremely, extremely hard to work out a sign and trade uh, thing that will have to happen in July involving one of this year's draft picks, one of those deals where we see it all the time where teams draft
yeah.
for another team and we go through the whole nonsense of the guy puts the hat on and then it's like he's never
Mm,
actually going to be on that team. This is kind of silly. And then we see the trade gets executed in July. That is with existing contracts, though.
yeah,
In a sign and trade, what could happen? Let's just say there was a trade worked out with the Orlando Magic where DeAndre Ayton's going for the number 1 overall pick, and that's going to be what the base parameters of the deal are. Then let's say Ayton decides in July, I don't want to go to Orlando. I want to sign
right,
straight out with the
right.
San Antonio Spurs. He screws that whole thing up. Now Orlando has drafted a player for Phoenix that maybe Orlando doesn't even want themselves, and Aiton's changing. And it's always important to note that in a sign and trade, the reason why it's sign and trade and not trade and sign is the sign part. The player has to agree. They have to sign first. That's the player holds the power there over the team. Now the team has power as far as, yeah, I know you want to get to T-Max. I know you want to get to the Golden State Warriors, but we don't like any of the stuff they can send, or it's not even possible, or whatever there. But that is just something to factor in and consider.
No, absolutely. The player, that's a very good point. The it's not trade and sign, it's sign and trade. So DeAndre Ayton has to want to sign with that offer sheet basically. But that doesn't give Ayton all the power, because this would just match anything that they're not happy with the trade offers for, and they're certainly not going to let him walk for nothing, because there's no way for the Suns to replace that talent of player at all. Basically, he would just be a complete minus if they let him walk. So they're not going to let him do that. They're going to sign, they're going to keep, and then trade him next year if they really want to move on. And that just, nobody wants that. So they're going to work together. I'm sure they're going to work together and find a mutual result, or they're going to work together and decide, you know what, we want to keep playing together. But let's pivot now. Let's pivot to another team or two. You mentioned the Indiana Pacers. Again, the Suns are not going to agree just to let him sign or outright to go with somebody else. The Pacers have a center that the Suns fans have always coveted for some reason. Obviously he's a good player, but he's got cap, a cap on his ceiling as well. But Myles Turner, let's assume health on Myles Turner. What could an Ayton for Turner trade look like? What works? I didn't have a chance to pull up his salary yet, but I think he's right in that little window.
Yeah, he actually fits. He's 18 million flat. So he would actually fit in there. Now, if you're the Pacers, what they can do is where it gets kind of interesting for them is you still have that salary imbalance where that's 18 million, but Dayton comes in counting for 30 million. So that's a 12 million difference there. But what the Pacers have the ability to do, much the same as the Pistons, is they use some of their cap space plus the player to make that work. So what they would do is they would create their cap space, then they would use about 12 million of that cap space and Turner's salary. That's how you match up to get Ayton to come in. What they would want to do is just time it up, which presumably the Suns would be amenable to, because the Suns aren't using cap space or anything like that. Where what the Pacers would want to do is use whatever remaining cap space they have, 10, 12, 14 million, use that up, then complete this trade using the rest of it. But that sequencing thing stuff that teams always work together on. Nobody blocks a deal because the sequencing doesn't work for them. They make it happen. So that's definitely a possibility for sure there, where it could be, Ayton goes, we
works.
Heard, yeah, it works. And we heard very credible reporting that they were interested in Ayton at the leading up to the trade deadline. And they obviously went a different direction with the Kings. But I feel like I get it to be a broken record with this at this time of the year. But sometimes stuff that was talked at the deadline it's too hard to make it work at the deadline, but then you set the groundwork so you can pick it back up in the offseason when rosters expand and there's cap space and all sorts of other stuff. So definitely possible that could be the direction that it goes. That one could actually be as simple as a straight up deal, because Turner's salary fits within the little Ayton window there as well. Okay. And you have the benefit there of he's not so much more money that you're probably not running into the hard cap in that. And if you are, you sort through that, you throw in, again, I hate to, talk about players this way, but you throw in Torrey Craig there if you needed to, or, you move off another.
Hey, the Pacers liked Craig a year ago. You might take it back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that one wouldn't work, right? Because he can't be traded back because they traded for this year. So that's So all right.
What's
so there's
the time frame on that?
But 1 year,
full year. Okay, it's not just end of season; it's full year.
But so you throw in Cameron Payne and you
sure,
sort out your backup point guard situation elsewhere, or you could even hey, you want to do a sign and trade for somebody, maybe they want Aaron Holiday back, and they could go that direction or something like that. So, but it's definitely possible,
Yeah.
ways to get there.
Cool. Okay, that's good. So that's interesting. So a Pacers one could work if the Suns wanted to go a fairly simple route that way. Let me give you a more complex one again. Again,
Mm-hmm.
pivoting back to test our understanding of what works and what doesn't. I have a suggestion from Riley Brogan on Twitter. Ayton and Payne to Charlotte for Rozier, Kai Jones, and a couple of picks. Now, we already talked about the couple of picks part. That part's not going to work. But let's just pretend the Suns loved Rozier a couple of years ago. Now they want to bring him back into a 3-guard rotation with Chris Paul and Devin Booker. And they've decided that it's okay to have a bunch of 6'1" guys running around in the backcourt. But let's just pretend that the Suns want Rozier back or want Rozier now for the 21 million number, basically in an Ayton. Can you aggregate salaries and make that work, or what? So basically, Ayton and Payne for Rozier and Kai Jones.
Yeah, you could definitely aggregate salaries. There's no problem with that. You can aggregate salaries. You can do double sign and trades. It's all about what happens with the sign and trade. It's all about avoiding the hard cap and then making that base year compensation math work. So in that case, you've got Terry Rozier about 21.5 million. So obviously doesn't fit in the Ayton alone. But once you add Payne to that, you're basically there. The challenge with that one comes in with the draft picks. That's where that becomes an issue. So that's why you probably can't get there.
Okay, but you could make that work by making up that difference by adding Payne on the one side and Kai Jones on the other.
Mm-hmm.
What does Kai Jones matter in this case?
Not enough that I don't think it would change the math. Let me look at it real quick. That you'd be bringing in about 24.3 million on that side. You'd be sending out Aiden's number was let's just make sure we're right on this. Is about that changes there, so you'd be sending out about 21. No, you'd be fine.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, good. So there's one that could work if the Suns really wanted to do that. I don't want them to do that, but what if they did? Okay, now I've got a weird, a bigger one, but I just want to talk about concept because obviously you don't have time to break down the numbers. But there's a big 3-team trade suggestion by D Coldest on Twitter. 3-team trade involving the Suns, the Pelicans, and the Pistons. So we already talked about the Pistons situation a little bit, but this is different players from the Pistons. It looks like Suns, Pelicans, and Pistons. Suns get Jonas Valanciunas from the Pelicans, Devontae Graham, Hamidou Diallo, and a pick. Again, we talked about picks already. Pelicans get Ayton, Shamet, and Kelly Olynyk, and the Pistons receive Hayes, Marshall, Craig, and a pick. So basically now the Pelicans are the ones getting Ayton, and they're swapping him out for Jonas Valanciunas with salary going each direction. What do you does that one work?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to run all the numbers because that's a lot of players.
That's a lot of players
involved. Yeah, that's a lot of moving parts. So I'd have to look at it again. The picks part is where probably, what are the picks too? I guess just to have a full idea of it.
Oh, the picks. Oh shoot, my screen just froze. Wow, I got a lot going on right now. You got basically the Suns getting number 5 from the Pistons, and the Pistons getting back number 8. I'm assuming from the Pelicans.
Yeah, that's not. That's not. That value is just way off, right? Like you're not getting Valanciunas, who's a starting center, plus the 5th. Like, how are you getting the 5th pick in the draft?
This is a Suns fan, man.
yeah, right. I mean, yeah, that's that's one too where even if the trade machine says yes, that doesn't mean that you're probably getting a yes.
Well, the tough thing for Suns fans is that the trade machine doesn't consider the sign and trade perfectly with Deandre Ayton. So we're all just kind of guessing here. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's basically, yes, that's a little bit too much. I'm not a big Jonas fan. Even the Pelicans didn't want to play him as much as they did in that last series. But anyway, that's something. Yeah, you could make something big and complicated like that maybe work, but the bigger and more complicated they are, the more rare they are. Here's
Mhm.
another request: John Collins. He makes 25 million. Um, but if you wanted to trade Ayton for Collins, could you just throw in like a Shamit? And again, this is Atlanta. Atlanta, again, we already talked about
Yep.
earlier in this show, is not going to want to, cannot acquire a sign and trade because of the tax apron issue. So that could not happen. But let's pretend they were under the apron. Again, John Collins at 25 million. Do the Suns only need to just add another 6 million to the trade out, basically sending out 36 million and John Collins coming back at 25? Or do you have to spin it off and add a third team to make the money work on the Atlanta side, just pretending they could do it?
Yeah, if Atlanta could get themselves under the apron, you need to add a little bit bigger of a deal. That's one where Payne or Craig doesn't necessarily work, but you could do Shamit there, and that would work. Now on the Hawks side, the challenge is they'd only be sending out 25 million. They'd be bringing in about 30. Call it almost 40 million,
Right.
assuming Aiton's there. So that becomes, and they have to add money. So you're right. You're probably then you're looking at, all right, what's a third team we can find and all that. And that's even assuming again that they can get below the tax apron.
Yeah. So that's twice now that we've said, even if Atlanta could do it, they would have to spin off somebody like Okongwu or someone like that they don't want to spin off to another
Correct.
team for nothing to make it all work.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? I really appreciate your time. I don't want to keep you too much
Sure.
longer here. I
Well, this
just
one's
needed to
hard
talk
for sure.
through. Yeah, I needed to talk through the basic ideas here on what who DeAndre Ayton could go for and who they can't. But basically, here's the bottom line, folks. And Keith, add to this if I have an incomplete list. Don't try to sign and trade him to somebody who's over the tax, basically in the luxury tax, because they're almost certainly locked in by that apron. That also means don't do a double sign and trade back to the Suns, because sign and trading Ayton puts him in. So you can't do Miles Bridges from Charlotte, for example,
Mhm.
because the Suns won't be able to take him back, because doing a sign and trade with Ayton on the way out puts him over the cap, on the over the apron. So don't do double sign and trades. Don't use teams on the luxury tax already. The Suns are most likely, if they wanted to trade him, they're going to have to trade him into space or somebody with a lot of space that they can maneuver with. So you're talking the Pacers, the Spurs, and the Pistons are like the most likely trading partners. And then what are you doing? I mean, do you really want Jerami Grant coming back for a year and then wanting 25 million a year going forward in his 30s? And he's already unhappy with it. With it, he wants a bigger role. He doesn't want to be a fourth option anymore because he wants the money for a first option. That, I don't know if Jerami Grant's a good fit. Let me add one last little thing, and I'm sorry to keep you, but um, the Spurs, they have a lot of cap space. They've got a guy, Jakob Pertl, that could reasonably fit role wise on as a center and in an offense. So you wouldn't mind benching him if you wanted to go small. Someone threw out, I forget who I saw it, Keldon Johnson. I think it maybe was Hollinger, Keldon Johnson and Jakob Pertl for a sign and trade on DeAndre Ayton. What do you think of that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's similar-ish to the Pacers scenario where
Yeah,
you'd be sending some salary plus using your cap space to make up the imbalance. I Keldon Johnson's one of my favorite guys in the league, so
yeah,
I don't know that I would go there, but to make the numbers work, they've got a whole bunch of different guys. They could do Devin Vassell, they could do Zach Collins, they could do you know I mean, yeah, Romeo Langford, Joshua Primo. There's any number of
yeah.
ways that they can get there to make the numbers work. So that part of it, I have no issue with at all. Because yeah, obviously Pirtle would be a part of it because you don't need Aiden and Pirtle in a deal. So yeah, so that's one that Pistons, Pacers, Spurs, those all make a lot more sense to me. And then one team I think could maybe potentially be just a sleeper in all this is Portland, just because we'll see what direction the Trailblazers are going to go, but they would likely have to go the cap space route to be able to do that, because otherwise, as you very well laid out, getting into double sign and trade stuff, just it's not workable because of where the Suns are at with the apron, bringing somebody back. That imbalance, it really does make it tricky to make these kind of trades.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Keith. I really appreciate your time today. And tell us where we can find you around the web.
Yeah, you can find my work. You can find me on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA. Be forewarned, I tweet a lot, especially during these finals games. But if you're interested in free agency stuff and all that, I'll be, heavily involved and all over that as we get into the draft and then free agency. Then written work, you can find me over at Spot Track. We're chugging along with our offseason preview series. We're about 25-ish teams maybe or so in on those offseason previews. The last handful are coming. So we've got like the Bucks, the Suns, the Heat, the Mavericks, Celtics, and Warriors, I think, left. So we'll see where we land on those and when those all come out. But that's there. And then I wrote all about Deandre Ayton and what could happen with him and his next contract on Spot Track as well. There. And then if for some reason you're listening to this and you're super interested in Celtics specific coverage, you can find me on Celtics blog. And if you like this kind of stuff where we break down contracts and really get deep into the CBA nerdy stuff, Trevor Lane and I host our own show called NBA Front Office Show, and you can check us out there. And we spend a lot of time talking all this sorts of stuff on that show.
The Front Office Show podcast is great. You guys got to check it out. And definitely on Twitter, you're a great follow as well. I love your cap knowledge. I love how much you know about the league and the fact that you're so in tune with all of them and so ready with these numbers even today without a ton of prep. So thank you so much.
So I have my spreadsheets.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I really do appreciate it. I'll have you on. I'd love to have you on again as free agency is whatever happens, what unfolds, if we get some huge Ayton rumors, things like that, or other rumors. One thing I noticed that you said you're about to post your Suns off-season preview coming up soon. The Suns have a ton of tradable contracts, not just Deandre Ayton. We're all so focused on Ayton, but a ton of other guys between 5 and 10 million, very tradable, eminently tradable. Could be aggregated together in the right trade to get the right kind of player. And I hope you cover that. So watch out for Keith, and he'll talk about all that stuff because that's where I get most of my ideas from. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.